And joining me now is Eric Wareham. He's the Vice President of Government Affairs for the Western Equipment Dealers Association. Welcome here, Eric.
Hey, thank you for having me on.
All right. So, an issue that maybe isn't top of mind for a lot of farmers, but is perhaps creeping up on their radar is the right to repair. And you were in Ottawa recently at CFA's AGM presenting on this topic. Let's start sort of at the very beginning, if we can. Sort of what, from your perspective, is the right to repair issue about here in Canada?
Yeah, well, I have a unique perspective here because our association of equipment dealers is North American. So I represent Canada and the States. We have about 2,200 equipment dealers between the two. And this issue is, I wouldn't say old hat, but it's been around for several years now in the United States. And so it's gone through some evolution from being introduced as an idea to getting caught up in legislation and then eventually kind of petering out. And so just to go back, like you said, to the very beginning, what is the right to repair? And I think that, that phrase right there is somewhat of a misnomer because it makes it sound like maybe there's somebody infringing on a right that we have. And I think it's better understood as kind of the aftermarket act or the aftermarket issue. Because really what's happened is that there's legislation that's been introduced in the United States and now in Ontario that's designed to make available to independent repair providers a couple things: parts, tools, documentation, and firmware, which includes embedded software. And that's where we start to get some issues arise.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So for some people, exactly, you hear sort of right to repair and it sort of makes it very much sound like, this is access to your equipment or those sorts of things. But definitely there's been concern that because so much of what we run, whether it's our laptops, our phones, or our tractors, run on software, where do farmers who potentially like to do all their own work or want to do all their own work, where can they run into trouble on this issue?
Yeah, and here's the thing: to my knowledge, there's never been a producer, a farmer, or a rancher that has been prosecuted for working on their own equipment. And I happen to be a rancher as well, and run equipment, and no one's ever knocked on my door to say, "Hey, you can't repair that." So again, that goes back to the kind of misunderstanding of what this issue is titled, this right to repair. I think what our stance as an industry is that you always have a right to repair, but not to modify. And what we mean by that is within that context of repair, if you go on to John Deere's website, for instance, you can order just about anything you want. You can order any manuals, schematics, parts, specialty tools. That is pretty much already all available. Now, not all manufacturers are created equal, and there may be some that don't have that level of capability or availability, I should say, of parts and tools and documentation. But for the most part, it's mostly available, and no one's stopping you from fixing your own equipment. The issue becomes when we have firmware that includes embedded software. And those embedded software, a lot of that, like you said, the sort of digital software that's included in this equipment contains proprietary information that there's been a lot of money, research and development put into creating and putting out a tremendous amount of technology into the field in the last 2 decades or so. And so the concern is that a lot of that embedded software, if it's allowed to be accessed or technology protection measures are circumvented to access it, a couple things can happen. One is that if there's tinkering with safety and emissions components, that we run into issues, obviously, with the safety and emissions. The second is that there's a capability or a possibility to reverse engineer that embedded software and then pirate that. And we've kind of seen that already. And so you have this sort of inherent conflict between copyright protections, the digital copyrighted software that has created all of this growth in productivity, but also you want to make it so that people can repair their devices, and I think for the most part you can.
So now, realistically, in talking with many farmers who are running very sophisticated, very current equipment, running on software, an error code can literally stop them in the field, and they cannot get around it and get going. They have to wait for a tech to come out and read that error code and fix it, whatever the case may be. What then is the responsibility of the manufacturer and the support provided to farmers if we've got these complicated machines with proprietary and copyrighted software? How then do you make sure that farmers keep rolling?
Yeah, that's a great question, because really what this issue boils down to is uptime. And dealers and manufacturers and farmers are all on the same page about that. We need to increase uptime. You can't have a piece of equipment fail in the field and sit there for a week during critical harvest and planting seasons. So we understand that it's about uptime. There's a couple things there that I think are challenges that we need to overcome. And what we're seeing in the States, at least, is we've partnered with ag producer associations like farm bureaus to work with them on coming up with solutions outside of the legislative arena that really address this problem. And so two of those things. One is that a lot of the equipment with all this digital capability, there's also the capability to remotely diagnose a lot of these problems when they do break down in the field. The issue, and we kind of mentioned this offline a little bit, is that there is what we call the digital divide. The lack of ubiquitous rural broadband prevents a lot of dealerships from being able to log into that combine or that tractor from the dealership remotely, diagnose the problem quickly so that when they come out to the farm or the ranch, they're able to repair it quickly. We just don't have that capability because a lot of people lack broadband, unfortunately, in rural areas where producers are farming and ranching.
Mm-hmm. So then next steps here. So clearly, I mean, as you mentioned, there's some legislation in Ontario around this issue. There's still, it's a hot topic still in the States as well. Where do things sit sort of going into this planting season now? What do you see happening next on this?
Well, I think one thing that we've done to educate producers and just stakeholders in general, whether it's policymakers or producers, is and around the states we have held several of these dealer demonstrations where we invite interested parties to a dealership to go through what some of the issues are, including also presenting what our industry commitment is, which is by 2021, all new equipment will have the ability to have read-only diagnostic tools, all of the specialty tools, software, updates, and manuals, and parts. So those will be available directly to end users. So that's an industry commitment that we want to share and walk through. That I think takes care of 99% of the problems involved in this issue without legislation. But also we walk people through an actual piece of equipment that when you referred to your equipment throws a code out in the field and shuts it down, sometimes you don't know what that code is, whether it's you need to change the oil or whether your transmission's overheating. It makes a big difference. And so we walk people through, hey, when it throws a code, here's what you can do. You can actually go online to a lot of these manufacturers' websites, type it in. It'll give you the plain English of what that code means, and here's how we can diagnose things. And then here's some of the challenges. And we really want to try to work together with producers to say, what's your experience with this? Does this fit your needs? And if not, can we work together on this issue? Because farm machinery is very different than handheld consumer devices like smartphones. It is just very different. There's, the safety, the environmental concerns, even the data security concerns involved in farm equipment are very different than consumer devices. And so we're talking about more of a business to business, two sophisticated parties, the producers, manufacturers, dealers. And so we want to bring those together and have those ideas. So through that vehicle is through dealer demonstrations. We've had several of those in the States. They've gone very well. And we're planning currently one in Saskatchewan and possibly one in Ontario and even Alberta. So we will plan those across Canada and really bring the stakeholders together to just talk about the issue. Because when you do that, the people closest to the problem come up with the best solutions. And a lot of times legislation, in my experience, creates unintended consequences and seems sometimes to be unnecessary.
All right. Eric, thanks so much for joining us.
Hey, thank you.